With a new movie on the horizon, it's time to revisit some aspects of the merc with a mouth that not everyone might be familiar with. Sure, we all know about super healing and crazy vigilance, but what about the bag of holding? Or how he reacts to people trying to mess with his brain? As he was portrayed in X-Men Origins Wolverine, the comics Deadpool was a villain at first, and remained one, or at least a wild card, for quite a while after that. He used teleportation devices to get away from irate heroes he just failed to kill, leaving him free to fight another day. The absolute convenience of being able to poof out of awkward situations, a dream. But as he got more popular and started acting like a protagonist, the rules changed. Protagonists need to spend more time and trouble than antagonists do, and writers had trouble creating much suspense for somebody who could, not only heal from anything, but could also just disappear when something wasn't going his way. It's just a little too convenient and shortcut-like for a quote-unquote good guy. The teleporters started going on the fritz or developing quirks, and finally Deadpool himself gave up on them because they made it too easy. Though he probably regretted that decision when he faced off against an evil version of Nightcrawler. Back in the 1990s, superhero fashion was super into pouches. Batman almost always had pouches on his utility belt, but like nowadays superheroes just have pouches everywhere. Just look at some of the comic covers from 1990 to 1995 drawn by Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, or any of their many imitators. Pouches, pouches, and more pouches. And unlike Batman, most of these pouches didn't seem to have any actual purpose. But comic book creators can always retcon something when they need to, and some of Deadpool's adventures, especially his appearance in the already exaggerated Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, feature him drawing all kinds of improbably big things out of his tiny little pouches or out of a simple sack. For old school nerds, this power recalls the bag of holding, a simple thing that allows fantasy adventurers to lead nomadic lifestyles without lacking tools or weighing themselves down by carrying too much gear. This sometimes power seems connected to Deadpool's secret knowledge that the physics of his existence are more flexible than anyone else would suspect. I kind of wonder if Deadpool constantly losing or forgetting his weapons in his first solo movie was kind of a tribute in a sense to this. Like, as cute as the Hello Kitty backpack was, and I get the plot point of forgetting it, I'd love to see Deadpool pulling out a ridiculous amount of weapons out of a tiny pocket in the future on screen. I think that would be fantastic. So every so often it pays for a mercenary hitman to look a little inconspicuous. Even Deadpool sometimes wants to make his assignments a little easier by sneaking up on a target before breaking out the big weapons. Or maybe he just wants to enjoy something resembling a normal day off. He could try some elaborate disguise involving a trench coat and a fedora, an excessive amount of bandages, or a, mascot uniform, but Marvel technology has given him another way to address these needs. The Marvel Comics universe, though perhaps not the X-Men cinematic one, has an image inducer that allows its permanently odd-looking residents, like Nightcrawler and the Beast, to enjoy an ordinary day in Central Park, sheathed in a hologram of a normal person. They can even walk around eating hot dogs, and nobody seems to notice their fangs. Although that's maybe just because New Yorkers don't really look that closely at each other, and tourists know to expect some weirdness. Wade has made occasional use of the inducer, but when he goes out for a walk in the park, his disordered mind tends to flip through different appearances every 30 seconds or so, which kinda defeats the purpose. And even then, he can only disguise himself over his costume. Now, most of Deadpool's problems aren't easily diagnosed, but it's kinda clear. Poor guy. He has some insecurities about his look. So Deadpool has, on occasion, flirted with the actual personification of death itself. Herself. Now, it would be easy to chalk this up to a hallucination if it weren't for the fact that one other person has had the privilege of socializing with death without actually dying. That other person? Thanos. And to say he's jealous and entitled now that he knows death has shared her favor with another would be a massive understatement. He salted Deadpool's game the only way he could, by cursing Wade with eternal life, so that even suspending his healing factor might not be enough to kill him. With how the MCU is going, this love triangle is unlikely to ever come up on the big screen, but it still qualifies as a power of sorts. Look, if Death is a person, she's definitely a useful person to have on your contact list. She has alerted Deadpool to cosmic threats and granted him the occasional favor. Granted, he is in another committed relationship at this point, so any communication with Death now carries the same sort of risks for him as, getting too chummy with an ex on Facebook. But like, come on, can we bring this back? So there are times that Deadpool makes a totally hilarious but off-the-wall comment that makes fans wonder how smart he is, or if he's just a little crazy. And the thing about Deadpool as a character is he's, quite honestly, verifiably insane. Or that's how he comes across. But there are benefits to being insane and having multiple personalities. People with telepathic powers have a very difficult, if not impossible time, getting into that slightly off brain of yours. Like, his thoughts are always so chaotic that you can't really make heads or tails of it. He was able to thwart off the telepathic abilities of Professor X and Emma Frost, which, as we can all agree, is quite the feat. Even Cable couldn't get into his mind. Now, there was only 2 instances where Deadpool was susceptible to telepathic attacks, but it seemed it was more because some of his powers come and go depending on who who's writing at the time. But even so, the power is still there, most of the time. And on top of that, since his cancer was also accelerated during the experiments that ended up curing it and giving him his powers, they are constantly dying off and regenerating just as quickly. So basically, it would be crazy, no pun intended, to even attempt to get into that brain of his. Also, considering the adult nature of the character in his movies, probably best to keep things that way. Who knows what's going on in his mind? I have no idea, but I know it's not PG. So whenever somebody thinks of Deadpool, you probably initially think of his signature snarkiness, as well as his ability to be a seriously awesome, albeit brutal fighter in any combat he finds himself in. Now the last thing you might think of, unless you're a diehard fan, like some friends of mine, is that he's actually fluent in multiple different languages. So in the Deadpool comics, for example, there are many different scenarios where Deadpool will just start speaking fluently in an entirely different language. For a second, you're wondering if you're reading that right, or maybe he's just going a little wild again. But it's actually quite the contrary for once. He's been able to speak Spanish beautifully to his teammate, Massacre, who only speaks Spanish in Deadpool and the Mercs for Money, and has also spoken fluent Japanese in Deadpool Team-Up issue #1 when he goes to Japan on a mission to infiltrate the Temple of 1,000 Buddhas. He even used American Sign Language in Hawkeye vs. Deadpool so he could communicate with Hawkeye during the team-up. Look, I guess it pays off to be alive for just so long while traveling the world in the name of justice. It's interesting to know that if Deadpool ever wanted to say, well, create a little army consisting of just himself, he could do so without anybody's help, if you catch my drift. Basically, he mastered the art of solo reproduction. Pardon me, let me back up. So in Deadpool Volume 2, Issue 44, we see that Wade's former therapist, who is currently stalking him, Ella Whitby, has come up with quite the nefarious scheme. We found out she was keeping a collection of his dismembered body parts wrapped up in her fridge. Now, obviously, this completely disgusted Deadpool, understandably so, and it got to the point where he throws them all out into a dumpster. But due to his extreme healing powers, the parts healed completely back together, and thus created evil Deadpool. Which might be a frightening thought to know that an evil version of Deadpool is now out there on the loose, but like it's also kind of cool to know that if he wanted to make multiple clones of himself, all he'd have to do is hack off some of his limbs and he'd have a clone, or multiples in no time. An army of one indeed. So MCU, Disney people, are we ever going to address what happened to the hand that he sawed off in the first movie while running away from Colossus? Look, if it ever turns up again as a scorned offspring or evil, I'm taking credit. While I'm on the topic of regeneration, most fans know Deadpool's healing factor is quite useful. It allows him to heal after being wounded and eat continuously without gaining any sort of ounces. Deadpool's body is also resistant to most poisons, but the merc also has another handy superpower. He can't get hungover. While Wade does get inebriated if he drinks a lot of booze, his body's super powerful immune system protects him from getting drunk easily, meaning that he needs a lot in his system before he can even remotely be affected. I think it was in Deadpool issue 7, he drinks an entire sack full of booze and doesn't get a hangover at all the next day. I can think of a lot of people who would love to have that as a superpower. So Deadpool's dramatically accelerated healing power hasn't made him entirely immortal, but he's more or less there. Particularly so when you combine it with the fact that he's met death several times, and we've got that relationship that I mentioned earlier, and as a result of that, the jealous Thanos cursed Wade to immortality in his grotesque skin and line of work. Like, I know I touched on it earlier, but I would love it if we could bring back Josh Brolin's Thanos for a moment in the future, just to touch on this, now that the Deadpool universe and the MCU are amalgamated. Please, Kevin Feige, pretty please. And before anybody comes for me in the comments, I know X-Men Origins Wolverine is the last thing you want to see in anything related to Deadpool, but the fact is, this movie gave him some abilities that he's never had before or since. Look, why do you think I left it till the end of the list? Look, here's the thing. This Deadpool possessed an amalgamation of powers from the dozens of kidnapped mutants on whom the Weapon X program experimented on in the film. Aside from making his teleportation ability organic and giving him the unseen ability to shut up by literally sealing his mouth shut, this Deadpool got optic laser blasts from Cyclops and Baraka-style retractable sword blades implanted in his arms, I guess to mirror Wolverine. But yes, the Deadpool that appears at the end of the movie is not played by Ryan Reynolds. Instead, it's Scott Adkins, because Ryan was like, no. He left that project over creative disputes. So Scott stepped in to take over for the finale. That character isn't even listed as Deadpool in IMDb. So yes, you can pretend it's a whole different character, but it was a cool power. And that's the end of our time once again, folks. I've been Alexa, resident emo girly. See y'all next time, nerds.